I never thought my life would turn into a twisted soap opera. But here I am, sitting in my dimly lit apartment, staring at the USB drive that just shattered my world. My name is Evelyn. And until today I thought I had it all. A perfect husband, a thriving career, and a life that most people would kill for. But now I'm not so sure. It all started this morning. I was rummaging through my desk drawer at work, looking for a pen, when my fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. I pulled it out, a small unmarked USB drive. Curiosity got the better of me, and I plugged it into my computer. What I saw next made my stomach churn. The video was grainy, but there was no mistaking it. My husband, Daniel, was in bed with another woman. Her face was turned away from the camera, but her body was unmistakably familiar. My heart raced as I leaned closer to the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The woman turned her head slightly, and my breath caught in my throat. It was my sister, Sophia. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My hands trembled as I yanked the USB drive out of the computer and shoved it into my purse. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was sit there, staring at the blank screen, trying to process what I'd just seen. I left work early, claiming I was sick. The truth was, I couldn't bear to be around people. I needed to be alone to figure out what to do next. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the couch, staring at the USB drive on the coffee table. Daniel came home a few hours later, his usual charming self. He kissed me on the cheek and asked how my day was. I forced a smile and told him it was fine, but inside I was screaming. How could he act like everything was normal? How could he look me in the eye and lie to me? I wanted to confront him, to scream and cry and demand answers. But something stopped me. Instead, I decided to play the long game. I hired a private investigator to follow Daniel and Sophia, to find out how long this had been going on, and if there was more to the story than I knew. The investigator's name was Marcus, and he was good at his job. Within a week, he had a full report on Daniel's movements. He'd been meeting Sophia at a hotel downtown, always in the afternoons when I was at work. But there was something else, something that made my blood run cold. The man in the video wasn't just Sophia's lover. He was her father. I couldn't believe it. My own sister had been sleeping with our father, and I'd been completely oblivious. I felt sick to my stomach, but I couldn't stop reading Marcus's report. There were photos, transcripts of conversations, and even a video of them together. I didn't know what to do. I felt like my entire world was crumbling around me. But as I sat there staring at the evidence, a plan began to form in my mind. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I was going to make them pay. That night, I waited until Daniel was asleep before I slipped out of bed and went to the bathroom. I locked the door and turned on the shower, letting the steam fill the room. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed Marcus's number. "I need you to dig deeper," I whispered. "I need to know everything about Sophia and my father. Everything." Marcus agreed and I hung up, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I was playing with fire, but I didn't care. I was going to uncover the truth no matter what it took. The next morning, I woke up early and made breakfast for Daniel. He seemed surprised but pleased, and I forced myself to smile as I handed him a plate of scrambled eggs. "You're in a good mood," he said, taking a bite. "I just wanted to do something nice for you," I replied, my voice steady. He smiled, and for a moment, I almost believed everything was normal. But then I remembered the video, and the smile on my face turned into a mask. I was going to destroy him. As the days went by, I continued to play the part of the perfect wife. I cooked, I cleaned, I smiled, and I laughed. But inside I was a volcano, ready to erupt at any moment. Marcus kept me updated on his progress, and with each new piece of information my anger grew. I learned that Sophia had been planning this for years, that she'd been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And now she had. But I wasn't going to let her win. I was going to take everything from her, just like she'd taken everything from me. The night before I planned to confront them, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of revenge. I thought about all the times I'd trusted Daniel, all the times I'd believed his lies. I thought about Sophia, and how she'd betrayed me in the worst possible way. And I thought about my father, and how he destroyed our family with his selfishness. I was going to make them pay. The next morning, I woke up early and got dressed in my best suit. I wanted to look powerful, confident, in control. I wanted them to see me as the woman I was, strong, determined, and unbreakable. I drove to the hotel where Marcus had told me they'd be meeting, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I parked in the garage and took the elevator up to the penthouse suite, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the door, I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the handle. Then I took a deep breath and pushed it open. They were there, just as Marcus had said they would be. Sophia was sitting on the bed, her hair disheveled, her face flushed. My father was standing by the window, his shirt unbuttoned, a glass of whiskey in his hand. They turned to look at me, their eyes wide with shock. "Hello, family," I said, my voice cold and steady. "We need to talk." And with that, the game began. The room was thick with tension, the kind that makes your skin crawl and your stomach twist into knots. Sophia's eyes widened, and she quickly pulled the sheet up to cover herself. My father, on the other hand, froze, the glass of whiskey trembling in his hand. "Evelyn," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" I stepped further into the room, closing the door behind me with a soft click. My heels echoed against the hardwood floor as I walked toward them, my eyes never leaving theirs. "I think the better question is, what are you doing here?" I said, my voice calm but laced with venom. Sophia looked at me, her face pale. "Evelyn, I can explain." "Explain?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "Explain what, Sophia? How you've been sleeping with our father. How you've been lying to me for years." My father set the glass down on the windowsill and took a step toward me, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Evelyn, please, let's talk about this. It's not what you think. Not what I think." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "I saw the video, Dad. I saw everything. So don't tell me it's not what I think." Sophia's eyes filled with tears, and she looked away, unable to meet my gaze. My father sighed and ran a hand through his hair, his expression a mix of guilt and desperation. "Evelyn, I know this looks bad, but there's more to it than you know," he said, his voice pleading. "Oh, I'm sure there is," I replied, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "But let me guess, you're going to tell me it's all some big misunderstanding, right? That you and Sophia were just what? Practicing for a play? Researching for a book?" My father's face flushed, and he looked down at the floor, unable to respond. Sophia, on the other hand, finally found her voice. "Evelyn, you don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "It's not what you think. I didn't want this to happen. It just did. It just did." I repeated, my voice rising. "You're telling me that you just happened to fall into bed with our father? That it was some kind of accident?" Sophia's face crumpled, and she buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. My father looked at her, his expression torn, then turned back to me. "Evelyn, please," he said, his voice soft. "Let's sit down and talk about this. There's a lot you don't know." I crossed my arms over my chest and stared at him, my eyes hard. "Oh, I'm sure there is. But before we have this little heart-to-heart, there's something I need to do." I reached into my purse and pulled out the USB drive, holding it up for them to see. Their eyes widened in recognition, and my father took a step back, his face pale. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It doesn't matter where I got it," I replied, my voice cold. "What matters is what's on it. And trust me, it's enough to ruin both of you." Sophia's sobs grew louder, and she looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation. "Evelyn, please don't do this. I'm your sister. We're family. Family," I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. "You lost the right to call yourself family the moment you betrayed me. You and Dad both." My father stepped forward, his expression pleading. "Evelyn, I know we've made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can make it right." "Make it right?" I laughed, a bitter hollow sound. "You think you can just sweep this under the rug and pretend it never happened? You think I'm just going to forgive and forget?" My father's face fell, and he looked down at the floor. His shoulders slumped in defeat. Sophia continued to sob, her face buried in her hands. I took a deep breath and steadied myself, my grip tightening on the USB drive. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me everything, every last detail. And if I even think you're lying to me, I'm going to destroy you both. My father looked up at me, his eyes filled with fear. Evelyn, please. No, I interrupted, my voice firm. No more lies. No more excuses. You're going to tell me the truth, and you're going to do it now. There was a long silence as my father and Sophia exchanged a glance, their expressions filled with guilt and regret. Finally, my father sighed and nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Okay, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. We'll tell you everything. I took a step back and crossed my arms over my chest, my eyes never leaving theirs. Good. Start talking. And with that, the truth began to unravel, piece by painful piece. The room felt suffocating as my father began to speak, his voice trembling with every word. Sophia sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clenched into fists, her face pale and tear-streaked. I stood there, my arms crossed, my heart pounding in my chest, waiting for the truth to spill out. It started years ago. My father began, his eyes fixed on the floor. Your mother and I, we weren't happy. We fought all the time and I made a mistake. A mistake. I repeated, my voice sharp. Is that what you call it? He flinched but continued. I met someone. Her name was Claire. She was kind, understanding. Everything your mother wasn't. We started seeing each other. And for a while I thought I could have it all, my family and her. But then Claire got pregnant. My breath caught in my throat, and I glanced at Sophia, who was staring at my father with wide, horrified eyes. Claire wanted me to leave your mother and be with her, but I couldn't, he continued, his voice breaking. I was afraid of losing everything. My family, my reputation, my life. So I left her. I told her I couldn't be part of her life or the baby's. And that baby was Sophia, I said, my voice flat. He nodded, his face filled with shame. Yes. I didn't know she was my daughter until years later. By then it was too late. Claire had raised her alone, and she hated me for what I'd done. I turned to Sophia, my heart aching with a mix of anger and pity. So you knew? All this time you knew he was your father? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes. My mother told me when I was a teenager. She said he abandoned us, that he didn't care about us. I hated him for it. And when I found out you were his daughter, I wanted to make him pay. By sleeping with him? I asked, my voice rising. Sophia shook her head, her sobs growing louder. No, it wasn't like that. I didn't plan for this to happen. I just wanted to hurt him, to make him feel the pain he'd caused my mother. But then things got out of control. Out of control? I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. You call this out of control? She looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation. Evelyn, I never meant to hurt you. I never wanted any of this to happen. I just wanted him to suffer. I turned to my father, my anger boiling over. And you? Did you know she was your daughter? He nodded, his face pale. Yes. I found out a few years ago. I tried to make things right, to be a part of her life. But she didn't want anything to do with me. And then this happened. I stared at them, my mind reeling. The truth was worse than I could have imagined. My father had abandoned Sophia and her mother, and Sophia had spent her life hating him for it. And now their twisted relationship had destroyed everything. Our family, our trust, our lives. So what now? I asked, my voice cold. What do you expect me to do with this? My father looked at me, his eyes filled with regret. Evelyn, I know we've made mistakes. But we're still your family. We can fix this. We can make it right. Make it right. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. You think you can just sweep this under the rug and pretend it never happened? You think I'm just going to forgive and forget? Sophia looked up at me, her eyes pleading. Evelyn, please. I know I've hurt you, but I'm your sister. We're family. We can get through this. Family? I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. You lost the right to call yourself family the moment you betrayed me. You and Dad both. There was a long silence as they stared at me, their faces filled with guilt and regret. Finally, I took a deep breath and steadied myself, my grip tightening on the USB drive. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice firm. You're going to leave. Both of you. I don't want to see either of you ever again. And if you try to contact me, if you try to come back into my life, I'll make sure everyone knows the truth. My father's face fell, and he looked down at the floor, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Sophia continued to sob, her face buried in her hands. I turned and walked toward the door, my heart heavy but resolute. As I reached for the handle, I paused and looked back at them one last time. Goodbye, I said, my voice cold and final. And with that, I walked out of the room, leaving them behind and stepping into a future that was uncertain but mine to shape. The door clicked shut behind me, and I stood in the hallway for a moment, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. My hands trembled as I clutched the USB drive, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on me like a lead blanket. I felt numb, detached, as if I were watching myself from a distance. I walked to the elevator, my heels echoing against the polished floor. The ride down felt like an eternity, the silence broken only by the soft hum of the machinery. When the doors finally opened, I stepped out into the lobby, my mind racing. I needed to get out of there. I hurried to my car, my hands fumbling with the keys as I unlocked the door. I slid into the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but the tears came anyway, hot and uncontrollable. I cried for what felt like hours, my body shaking with sobs. I cried for my shattered family, for the lies and betrayals that had torn us apart. I cried for Sophia, who had been so consumed by her hatred that she had destroyed herself in the process. And I cried for myself, for the innocence I had lost and the future that now seemed so uncertain. When the tears finally subsided, I wiped my face with the back of my hand and took a deep, shuddering breath. I knew I couldn't stay here, couldn't go back to the life I had known. I needed to get away, to start over somewhere new. I started the car and drove, my hands steady on the wheel. I didn't know where I was going, but I didn't care. I just needed to put as much distance between myself and that hotel as possible. As I drove, my mind began to clear, and a plan started to form. I would leave the city, leave everything behind. I would start a new life, one where I could be free of the lies and the pain. But first I needed to tie up loose ends. I pulled into a parking lot and took out my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed Marcus's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm and professional. "Evelyn," he said. "What's going on?" "I need your help," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "I need you to do one more thing for me." "Name it," he replied without hesitation. "I need you to make sure that USB drive gets into the right hands," I said. "I want everyone to know the truth." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear Marcus's mind working. "Are you sure about this, Evelyn? Once it's out there, there's no taking it back." "I'm sure," I said, my voice firm. "They don't deserve to hide behind their lies anymore. I want the world to know what they've done." Marcus sighed, but he didn't argue. "All right, I'll take care of it. But Evelyn, are you going to be okay?" I hesitated, then nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I will be. I just need to get away from all of this." "Take care of yourself," he said, his voice soft. "And if you ever need anything, you know where to find me." "Thank you, Marcus," I said, my voice breaking. "For everything." I hung up the phone and leaned back in my seat, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I was playing with fire, but I didn't care. I was done being the victim, done letting them control my life. I started the car again and drove, my mind focused on the road ahead. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew it didn't matter. What mattered was that I was finally taking control of my own life. As the miles rolled by, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. The weight of the lies and betrayals began to lift, replaced by a sense of determination and resolve. I was going to start over. I was going to build a new life, one where I could be happy and free. And no one was going to stop me. The sun was setting as I reached the outskirts of the city, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. I pulled over at a rest stop and got out of the car, stretching my legs and taking a deep breath of the cool evening air. I looked out at the horizon, the endless stretch of road ahead of me, and felt a sense of hope I hadn't felt in a long time. This was my chance, my fresh start. and I was going to take it. I got back in the car and drove, the road stretching out before me like a blank canvas. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to find out. I was free, and I was never going back. The car hummed steadily as I drove through the night, the highway stretching endlessly before me. The city lights faded into the distance, replaced by the quiet darkness of the countryside. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: relief, sadness, anger, and a strange newfound sense of purpose. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I was heading toward something better. As the hours passed, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. My father's betrayal, Sophia's twisted revenge, and the lies that had shattered our family. It was a painful truth to face, but it was also liberating. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly free from the weight of their expectations and manipulations. I pulled into a small town just as the sun began to rise, the sky painted in soft hues of pink and gold. I found a cozy diner on the edge of town and parked the car, my stomach growling in protest. I hadn't eaten in hours, and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting from the diner was irresistible. I stepped inside and took a seat at the counter, the warmth of the place immediately comforting. The waitress, a kind-looking woman with a bright smile, handed me a menu and poured me a cup of coffee. "Long night?" she asked, her voice friendly. I nodded, forcing a smile. "You could say that." She gave me a sympathetic look and left me to my coffee. I sipped it slowly, savoring the warmth and the quiet. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of peace. After breakfast, I found a small motel on the outskirts of town and checked in. The room was simple but clean, and it felt like a sanctuary. I collapsed onto the bed, exhaustion finally catching up with me. I slept for hours, the kind of deep, dreamless sleep that only comes after a long and emotional journey. When I woke up, the sun was high in the sky, and I felt refreshed, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I spent the next few days exploring the town, getting to know the people and the place. It was a quiet, close-knit community, and I found myself drawn to its simplicity and warmth. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. I found a small apartment above a bookstore and decided to stay. The owner, an elderly woman named Margaret, took me under her wing, offering me a job at the store and a place to call home. As the weeks turned into months, I began to rebuild my life. I made friends, found new hobbies, and slowly let go of the pain and anger that had consumed me for so long. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. One day, as I was unpacking a box of new books, I found a letter tucked inside one of them. It was addressed to me, in my father's handwriting. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it, my hands trembling. "Evelyn," it began. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope you'll at least read this. I've spent the past few months reflecting on everything that happened, and I realize now how much I've hurt you. I was selfish and I let my mistakes define me, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. I hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me, but I understand if you can't. I just want you to know that I love you, and I always will." I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope, my eyes filled with tears. I didn't know if I could forgive him, but I knew I could let go of the anger and the pain. I took a deep breath and went back to work, the weight of the past finally lifting. I knew I had a long road ahead of me, but I was ready to face it. I was free, and for the first time in a long time, I was happy.